talking to see what we can do. The UK certainly won't be walking away from the talks. I think people would expect us to go the extra mile.
Brexit was meant to be a step in the right direction towards economic independence. Gone were the days when the UK relied on the EU to do its bidding. Now, the nation had a golden opportunity to seek bigger and better trading opportunities. Well, where are they? In the years since the UK left the European Union, its trade policies have become a high-stakes gamble. Once tied to the EU's extensive trade network, Britain now finds itself renegotiating its place on the global stage, striking new deals with old allies and seeking fresh opportunities in emerging markets. While some see this as a chance for economic reinvention, others argue that the costs have outweighed the benefits.
The UK and the European Union have reached a trade deal after months of negotiations. This agreement will help both sides avoid costly economic consequences set to kick in by the end of the year.
The big idea behind Brexit was that the UK would be free to make its trade deals around the world, replacing lost access to the EU single market with agreements in high-growth regions like Asia and the United States. After leaving the EU, the government worked quickly to replace the many trade agreements Britain had as an EU member. The plan was not just to copy existing deals but to expand them, signing new agreements with countries like Australia, India, and the US. The UK even aimed to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, a trade bloc stretching across the Pacific. To be fair, it wasn't all grim and gloom. The UK set up a Department for International Trade and rapidly secured a large number of free trade agreements between 2019 and 2020. By the time the UK officially left the EU's customs union on December 31, 2020, it had managed to roll over many of the agreements it had as an EU member into UK-specific deals. In 2021 alone, 36 FTAs came into force, including the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. As of December 2024, the UK has 39 active free trade agreements with nations and trade blocs, covering 102 countries and territories, including 5 new agreements and 32 continuity agreements. However, these successes should not be overstated.
So can we stop this nonsense about the markets? The pound has been in a bear market since July 2014. Fact. Now,
2023 rolled over and it was time for Brexiteers to deliver stats on one of their bold claims during the 2016 referendum. It was time to showcase whether the UK had indeed notched up 80% of its trade as the first former member of the EU. Spoiler, it had not. Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the man in charge in 2023, claimed that over 70 new trade deals had been secured since the UK left the EU. However, many pointed out that the majority of these deals were simply rollover deals from the nation's time in the EU. Likewise, these deals maintained EU trading relations with other countries. Even if 70 new trade agreements had been reached, people wanted the coveted jewel in the proverbial crown, the promised deal with the United States. But before we talk more about why the UK was never able to secure the coveted US trade deal and who's to blame for it, let's talk some more about the trade deals that it did have and how everyone reacted to them. Former Secretary of State for Business and Trade Kemi Badenoch was vague when asked about the 80% trade coverage target. Instead, she shifted the focus, insisting that the government was prioritising the substance of trade deals, not the timing. The trade deal with Australia, once labelled a major win, was harshly criticised by former Agriculture Minister George Eustice, who admitted it was not actually a very good deal. He even called for the resignation of Crawford Falconer, the interim permanent secretary for the Department for International Trade, accusing him of dismissing experts who understood trade policy better than he did. The UK's deal with New Zealand didn't fare much better either. The Institute of Directors described it as having a negligible impact on UK GDP. Meanwhile, negotiations to improve trade agreements with Canada and Mexico, which were originally rolled over from EU membership, slowed down. Canada demanded similar agricultural concessions that Australia was granted, raising concerns that the UK might have set a risky precedent. Trade talks with India also hit a wall. A major sticking point appears to be India's demand for easier visa access to the UK for Indian workers, something that many in the Conservative Party were reluctant to offer. There are also broader concerns about the deal, including its potential impact on workers' rights in India, as highlighted by trade unions. It's never just one reason, is it?
To beat around the bush or to try and sugarcoat anything. This is a very serious situation.
The Northern Ireland Protocol has been a key and controversial part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement, designed to prevent a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. For clarification, the former is not a member of the EU, and the latter is. Instead of customs checks at the land border, the protocol keeps Northern Ireland aligned with some EU trade rules, meaning goods arriving from Great Britain are subject to checks at Northern Irish ports. The US has a vested interest in maintaining stability in Northern Ireland, with many American politicians, particularly former President Joe Biden and members of Congress, emphasizing the need to uphold the Good Friday Agreement. When the UK attempted to unilaterally alter or override the protocol, US officials warned that doing so could jeopardize peace and harm US-UK relations. Biden made it clear that a UK-US free trade deal would be unlikely if the protocol undermined stability in Northern Ireland.
I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol. Our preference remains a negotiated solution with the EU.
Again, it's never just one reason, is it? In 2022, then Prime Minister Liz Truss said that no formal trade talks with the US were taking place and that she didn't expect them to begin in the short term to medium term. Not only was this a huge blow for Brexit advocates as a whole, but Liz was going back on her word. In 2019, as the Trade Secretary, she'd penned an op-ed for the Telegraph titled, "I'm ready to make a US trade deal happen." So why didn't it happen? Why had she suddenly turned pessimistic about it? A significant hurdle in the UK-US trade negotiations is the divergence in food safety regulations. The US agricultural sector seeks access to the UK market for products like chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef. Practice is permitted in the US but banned in the UK due to stringent health and safety standards. American trade negotiators have pushed for the UK to loosen its restrictions to allow greater access to the US agricultural products. However, British consumers and farmers have strongly opposed any weakening of standards, fearing it could undermine UK food safety and hurt domestic agriculture by allowing cheaper, lower standard imports to flood the market. Truss, wary of public backlash, insisted she wouldn't compromise on food safety. Meanwhile, US negotiators see the UK stance as a major barrier to progress, making it difficult to reach a trade deal. Not to sound like a broken record, but never just one reason, right?
Well, we're going to see what happens. It'll happen. But we'll see how things work out. It might happen with that, but it will definitely happen with the European Union. I can tell you that.
Even if the UK and US manage to overcome key trade barriers and reach an agreement, the actual economic benefits for the UK would likely be minimal. UK government analyses, specifically from the Office for Budget Responsibility, estimated that a sustained increase in public investment could boost the UK's GDP by 0.4% after 10 years and by 1.4% in the long-run 50-year horizon. A relatively small boost compared to the economic losses incurred by leaving the European Union's single market. By now, it's clear that the United Kingdom has not achieved its trade goals, the very same that was promised at the time of Brexit. It's now time to discuss the next step forward. More so, how can the UK mitigate the damage done by Brexit? Keir Starmer's government is facing a challenge. The Labour Party defeated the Conservative Party after a long history of defeat. The very fact that Starmer stepped into office cemented the idea that people were ready to witness a change. Any change at this point would be good. Starmer's government is posed with the task of forming trade policies in a post-Brexit world, particularly mending or reshaping the UK's relationship with the EU. According to David Hennig, the director of UK Trade Policy Project, a realistic trade strategy must be established and effectively implemented to instill business confidence and drive economic growth. He argued that since Brexit, there has been no clear trade policy that promotes the UK as an export hub while balancing other priorities like migration and net zero targets.
Approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Starmer had previously discussed his commitment to open trade, particularly with the EU 27. However, early opportunities to reach any substantial goal, such as by way of regulatory alignment with the EU and joining the World Trade Organization MPIA, were overlooked. This has caused concern for stakeholders who fear that despite championing change, the government's trade strategy continues to follow past trends, focusing on small business exports and free trade agreements. The economic benefits of FTA negotiations with the Gulf Cooperation Council may provide more in foreign investment than export growth, and FTA talks with India have stalled. and discussions with Switzerland have failed to leverage potential EU cooperation on mutual recognition agreements and rules of origin. Progress has also been slow in reshaping the nation's relationship with the EU. The government's trade policy framework includes a defence and security agreement, veterinary and youth mobility discussions, emissions trading scheme linkage, and broader economic cooperation. However, substantial challenges remain. The ability to negotiate its own terms when it came to FTAs was one of the selling points of the Brexit campaign. Supporters of the Vote Leave, Leave EU, and UKIP argued that it was about time the nation called the shots on how it wanted to trade. Moreover, Brexiteers argued that this would allow them greater bartering power when it came to establishing FTAs across the Pacific. Who wouldn't want to trade with one of the strongest economies in the world, after all? United States, India, and Canada, to name a few. We've already talked about why the US took a step back from holding formal trade talks with the UK, but what went wrong with India and Canada? Negotiations between the UK and Canada stalled primarily due to disputes over agricultural products. Canada sought greater access to the UK market for its hormone-treated beef, which the UK resisted due to health and safety concerns. Conversely, the UK aimed to extend low-tariff arrangements for its cheese exports to Canada, but Canada was reluctant, fearing economic repercussions for its dairy industry.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, there is one sun, one world, one grid, one Narendra Modi, and I have great pleasure in handing over.
As far as India was concerned, the UK asked for greater entry into the nation's professional services market, including sectors like law and accounting. However, India was hesitant to open these areas to foreign competition, offering less access than in its agreement with Australia and other countries. A possible trading chip was visa access. India sought more favourable visa arrangements for its professionals to work in the UK, but the UK was cautious about immigration commitments. After all, immigration was one of the several reasons that led to Brexit in the first place. So, the FTAs aren't working the way Brexit supporters had hoped. In hindsight, this was an expected outcome. Many experts had voiced their concerns, but then again, this wasn't to suggest that the economic setbacks faced in the aftermath would be permanent. The UK has made several free trade deals and its economy isn't necessarily in shambles, but it isn't what people had hoped, and there are several industries that have suffered because of faltering trade. In 2024, the Aston University Centre for Business Prosperity found that the negative effects of the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement have worsened over time. Their report, Unbound, UK Trade Post-Brexit, highlighted a 33% drop in the variety of goods exported, with agriculture, textiles and materials sector being the most affected. Analysing the UK-EU trade from 2017 to 2023, the study showed a 27% fall in UK exports and a 32% decline in imports since the TCA took effect in 2021. The UK saw a decline in trade with what should have been its biggest customer, the European Union. Yes, the TCA was introduced to allow free-flowing trade between the two, but this wasn't the same as being part of the European single market. New barriers were introduced, leading to a notable decline in UK goods reaching EU member nations. While some sectors, like railway and aircraft manufacturing, saw slight gains, most industries saw significant losses. Agri-food, textiles and materials manufacturing have been hit hardest, with both export value and variety declining. Imports have also contracted, particularly in agri-food, optical, and textiles products. However, sectors such as ships and furniture have seen some import growth. But all of this was to be expected. Inflation rose by 1.7% in 2017, raising the average household expenditure by £400. Similarly, there had been a GDP decline of 2.5% immediately following the referendum, and uncertainty led to a 6% drop in business investment and a 1.5% reduction in employment. Brexit-related trade policy uncertainty also reduced international trade, with British firms increasing offshoring to the EU and European companies cutting investment in the UK. A 2022 study found Brexit reduced competitiveness, and a 2024 report linked it to nearly 300,000 lost jobs in London. By 2035, the UK could see 3 million fewer jobs and £311 billion in lost economic value. All in all, economists agree that the UK's exit from the single market and customs union negatively impacted goods trade. Several industries have been hit hard by the transition, smaller firms more than the larger ones. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the fall in trade will reduce the long-term size of the UK economy by around 4%. The OBR has already claimed that Brexit, in the long term, will reduce exports and imports of goods and services by 15%. In monetary terms, that's equivalent to roughly £100 billion. The OBR, however, acknowledges that these are just assumptions. They are subject to change. If the trade impact proves to be less severe than expected, the estimated economic downturn could be revised. However, there is currently no indication that Brexit will have a net positive effect on the United Kingdom's economy. Did the UK lose big on its biggest gamble yet?